Hello, everybody. It is Sunday, December 8th. My name is Justin Ayres, and you are listening to the Bell Lap Podcast, where we are going to be talking about all things Grand Slam track related. This is episode 1, hopefully of many to come over the next year and beyond. I am just so excited for this new track league. I think that the idea that Michael Johnson has and that he is moving forward with is something that could just absolutely revitalize the sport of track and field. And as soon as I saw it, I knew that it was something that I wanted to really understand, wanted to follow, and having a podcast was kind of an idea I came up with to follow through with that. So I'm going to introduce myself first. So again, I said my name is Justin Ayres, and I'm a runner out here in the Midwest. I ran track in high school. I mainly am a distance runner. So in high school, I was more of an 800 miler. I had the privilege of running in college, so I ended up at Huntington University, and I was able to be a part of some very competitive teams there. I was more of a 5K mile kind of hybrid. I focused more on distance, and I also got the opportunity to run cross country at both levels. I now am a coach, and so I coach distance at a local high school here, or at a local middle school here, and it's something I love doing. I do think that my specialty is probably the mile. I think that I understand that distance the best, but as I've been head track coach over the program I am involved with, I've gotten to understand a little more of the sprints and what goes into building power and speed and making the athletes better at the shorter distances. And so I love running. I actually am a marathoner now, and so I've ran 3. I just ran the Indianapolis Monumental Marathon, and I was able to have a huge drop in my time. I ran my first marathon in 2021 at the Chicago Marathon, and I ran about a 3:11, dropped that to a 2:58 in Milwaukee last year, and then I was able to run a 2:44. It's amazing what Vaporflies are able to do for you, as I think that was a big contributor, but I also learned a lot about myself and was able to get a higher mileage. And kind of in that marathon training block is where I really started hearing about Grand Slam track. Originally, I think in the middle of my build was when the Olympics just were held, and right before, I think, is when Cindy McLaughlin originally announced that she was signing with this league, and they kind of made their big grand opening and kind of announced themselves kind of to the world. And then obviously you go in and you've got Gabby Thomas who gets gold, Grant Fisher gets his double medal at the 5K and 10K. Obviously Cole Hawker has just his phenomenal 1500, and me and my wife both got the privilege to hear him talk before the Monumental Marathon, and he is probably one of the reasons I am most excited about Grand Slam track, is just the opportunity to get to watch him race 4 times over the summer before he builds up to the World Championships, which I believe are next year. But even beyond that, I think that this is just a great opportunity. As I've followed, I like a lot about what Michael Johnson, the commissioner, is saying, the brand that he's starting to build. And so we're just going to get into it. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my goals and my initial thoughts. I think I'm going to keep this one brief, and then moving into podcasts going forward, we're going to aim for like 30-ish minutes. We'll see how that goes. I plan for these to be on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, so you can follow the Bell Lap on all of those locations. On Instagram, we are the BellLap_pod, so you can follow us there on Instagram. And that's pretty much where I plan on doing things and making announcements for the podcast as we get started. My biggest goal for this podcast is I've just been looking around trying to find more people talking about Grand Slam track. I've see a lot from Sidious Mag, and I've listened to the podcast there, and I think that I don't know what his name is, but he does a phenomenal job of reporting and talking to all the athletes, and even athletes who are not involved with Grand Slam track. I just listened to his interview with Noah Lyles, and I thought he did a good job of also hinting at Noah, like, what do you think about Grand Slam track? What do you not like about it? Is this something you get interested in? And I thought it was some real good journalism. and stuff that people needed to know and questions that are very relevant to the future of Grand Slam track and the success it's going to have in its inaugural year. Another reason that I want to have a place to talk about Grand Slam track is I think that one of the biggest challenges that track has had, and I think it's starting to get solved, but I think one of the biggest problems track has had for a long time is that it's so hard to get to know the racers and get to follow them over the span of a season. I think this is both because track revolves in a 4-year block around the Olympics, and everyone's just kind of trying to put themselves in the best position to do that. And then, I mean, you've got the World Championship that kind of divides that in half, but still, a lot of these people pop in during those 2 times, and then they might pop out, and then they'll randomly show up at a meet here or there. But then you never know when they're going to come out and show up in a new meet. And so that's something that I really do want to do, is I want to get to know the racers. Like, Grand Slam track is going to have the roster of 48, and I think it's going to be really cool getting to dive into each individual group, see just who they are, see what their skills are, what some do well, what some don't do well, and be able to just talk about it and see if we can get a conversation started around track and field. I love race analysis. When I coach my athletes, normally I end up watching them run, and then I write them a full paragraph about what I thought about their race, and then I give them an opportunity to respond to me, and we're able to have a conversation just about the technical side of it and the just strategic side of it. I don't think people give the strategic side of running enough credit, even in shorter, more technical races like the 100 and the 100-meter hurdles. But I'm sure that there will be more places that will talk about running, and I'm excited to hopefully just listen to them continue to hype up Grand Slam track, because I just think it's going to be such a big deal, especially in this inaugural year. I do think that there are a lot of other track meets and track leagues that are worth talking about. I love marathons. I follow the world majors. It's one of my biggest goals is to run all 6 of them. But I'm going to try and keep that out of this. I'm going to try and keep this podcast specifically for Grand Slam track conversation. Maybe if I get really, really excited about a lineup for a certain major, I'll just do like a special episode or something like that. But for right now, it's just going to be Grand Slam track. We're going to talk about the breaking news, analysis. I'd love to interview people. If this ever gets to the point where I can interview them, that'd be awesome. But until then, it's just going to be a lot of me talking about just all the different things. I'll spitball some ideas that I think could be really cool from time to time that I think of, like off the top. One conversation that's already getting started about Grand Slam track is, are people going to be able to gamble on it? I think that is just such a loaded conversation, and it's packed, and I think it'd be really cool to unpack in a later episode. So we might get there, we might not, but this will be a place where I'll try and accumulate all the breaking news I get from all the athletes, and I'm going to start following all the athletes, and I'm going to then try and disseminate it and then help make this a place where we can get to know all 48 of them, because that's just what's so hard, I think, about track and field and the landscape it's at right now, is it's just harder to get to know the athletes. I do think it's growing. I think you have people like Cole Hocker and Clayton Young, at least from the distance perspective, who are creating more, and content creation is booming in the running side of the sport. And I think that's something that the commissioner, Michael Johnson's really embracing. In the interview he just did with Citius Mag, he did a whole section about how he is very excited on each racer who has their own brand to really get into their own content creation and continue to pump that out, in addition to the marketing that Grand Slam track is already going to be doing. And so that's going to be something that's really cool. What is Grand Slam track? I'm sure if you're listening to this, somehow you got connected to this because you at least know what it is. But for those of you maybe who might be hearing about this and you don't know what it is, Michael Johnson, who is an Olympic gold medalist in the 400, and I believe he holds the world record, he launched this new track league, and it's going to have 4 meets throughout the year. He has a lineup of 48 racers, and it's divided into 6 event groups. And so I didn't write these down, but off the top of my head, it's short hurdles, long hurdles, short distance, long distance, and then short sprints, long sprints. And within those different groups, they will do 2 separate events. So like the short sprints is the 1 and the 200, short hurdles is 100 flat and the 100 hurdles. And then you've got long distance is the 3K and the 5K, short distance, 800, 1500. And then I believe I left out long sprints is the 2 and the 4, and long hurdles is the 4 hurdles, and then I think it's the 200 flat. I'll have to look that back up, and we'll, again, dive into the events more specifically, but there's 2 events. They decide points on how you finish, so you get first, you get the most points, the bottom, the least. You run the 2 races. Person with the most points at the end of the weekend, because these are going to be split out into 3-day meets, whoever gets the most at the end of the weekend will win the event. There will also be challengers, and so this is something that I think is a really cool idea about Grand Slam track, and it might be some kind of element that can save it if it runs into an early challenge to draw interest. Is there will be an additional challenger, 4 challengers brought in for each event group. So like in the 48, that's 6 event groups, and then the 2 genders, male, female, that are going to be racing. So for instance, like in the 100 meter dash, you'll have your group of 4. Well, then this would be an amazing time for like these NFL players who want to talk about how fast they are, like Xavier Worthy and Tyreek Hill. Hop into one of the Grand Slam track competitions over the summer. It's the off season. Show us how you stack up. I think that would be such a cool thing to do. I think you could also do the same with maybe some of the collegiate athletes, and you'd have to figure out the money side of thing, and I get that, but like, to get Graham Blanks, the Harvard runner who just won the national championship in cross country, it'd be so cool to just get him into one of these races and see how he can compete against some of the best runners in the world at this point. So initially, like, I think that this idea makes a lot of sense. I think that the United States specifically needs a league that is headquartered, hosted here, that is put onto a higher stage than what is already happening. Because right now we've got USATF, and they do their different championships, and then you have the trial series, and then you've got your random kind of meets that are sprinkled throughout, like you've got Milrose games and that kind of stuff, but like we don't have a specific league. And it's just so interesting that that's the case, considering track and field in the United States is one of the best countries for track and field. I'm not going to go out and say we are the best, but like if you look at each event, especially in this most recent Olympics, we had a contender in every single race, it seemed. And the ones we didn't have contenders there, I think there were legitimate reasons to why we didn't. And so I think the U.S. is such a like foundational country when it comes to track and field, but there's just never been like something that's been able to take off that's brought together just the top the U.S. has to offer. And so I know some people were harping along like the whole idea of Grand Slam track is Michael Johnson's branding it like it's the best in the world and it is American. And yeah, there's the whole branding thing, but I think the United States needs a track league like this. And I think it's something that takes off, because if you look into high school sports participation by NHFS, track and field is the most participated sport if you combine boys and girls in the United States. It is more than football, more than basketball, more than soccer, more than all of them. Now, football dominates if you take in the male participation and stack it up. But because the female participation is not as high, track and field is dominant. And I just think that there's a big opportunity for a lot of these high school kids to get drawn into something like Grand Slam track, especially just because there's so many track athletes in the U.S. So getting into what I love the most about Grand Slam track. I love that it's going to be, I think, easy to follow. I think that the roster of 48 is going to be a big deal because people know what's coming. People know that, the challengers might get mixed around, but if you're going to turn on the TV, Cindy McLaughlin's going to be on, or you're going to get to see Cole Hawker or Grant Fisher, or the athlete that draws you in that you might be able to get connected to as they start the storytelling process. And you know that they're going to compete, whereas track and field is just so scattered right now. I think I saw something. It might have been a Citius Mag article that I was reading, but it was something along the lines of like the top 3 medalists in the 100-meter dash that Noah Lyles won. Maybe that was like they only competed against each other. That was the only time that year, and maybe the only time in the past couple years they've competed against each other and something like that. I could be wrong, but there's a competition problem in track and field. And people want to see, as Michael Johnson says, people want to see the best compete against the best. I want to watch Cole Hawker and Josh Kerr and Jared Naguse and Jakob Ingebrigtsen race all the time. And obviously Jakob Ingebrigtsen's not a part of this at this moment, but just especially even those 3, like I as a track fan want to see that. And now that I can see, at least I get these group of 4, like the 400 meter group, the long sprints on the man's side, it is all the top 4 from the most recent Olympics. They got 1 through 4, and that is incredible. And it's going to be so cool to get them competing against each other over the full year. I already brought up, I think that the idea of the challengers are super cool. Like, I think it'd be so cool to get Tyreek or Xavier Worthy out there and just let them race the 100 and the 200 against some of these elite sprinters. I've read that there's good prize money for the athletes that are involved with this, so I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I do know that I was watching an interview, and they were talking about the compensation that the athletes are going to get and how it is potentially game-changing. I think it was maybe it was Noah Lyles who was talking about just all of these, maybe not as big as like he is, but these other athletes who are going to be able to find compensation through just their competition in general and the shockwaves that could send through the whole entire sport of running and sprinting and track and field. And maybe one day we reach a point where brands aren't the driver. Brands are the secondary attention piece for these athletes, and they're able to focus solely on getting into competitive meets that are going to compensate them to what they deserve. I think that Michael Johnson, when I listen to him talk, I think he knows what he's doing. I think that this brand, and like when I go on their website and I scroll through their Instagram feed, I think they know what they're doing as far as the brand goes. Their Instagram and their social media is continuing to grow. It's not growing like astronomical, but every time you go on there, it's like they've got 100 new followers. And I feel like a month ago they were like at like 50,000, and now they're closing them at 55,000, and it's going to keep going steadily. And I think especially once we actually get to April and get to Kingston, I think we could see this go somewhere even more. But I think they're doing a good job right now of just growing the slight excitement, but they're not like trying to overhype themselves either. I think that they're aware that this is going to take time. Like nothing pretty much is super successful right off the bat. It's something that you have to commit to and keep working with. And I think that Johnson understands that. So I'm very excited to have him as the commissioner moving forward. I think that there's just an understanding also of the athletes he brings along too, because he was one of them. He's been in their shoes, he's been at the top, and he knows how they think, and he knows how to appeal to them, and I think he knows how to turn them into a marketable product that the American public might be able to buy into, especially because we know that the market for track exists. I love that they're embracing creators. I love that he just has a willingness to go and try something different. I think that's a big part of Michael Johnson's just goals with Grand Slam track is he's looked at the landscape that track and field is currently resting in, and I think he's saying, this is not working. We've got to do something different. And even if he's throwing different ideas over the next year at the wall and something's not sticking, I think we're also going to find that he's able to strike some chords with the audiences he's drawing in, and he's going to be able to make some things work. I love the potential that a league like this has to develop. I've always thought track and field was a sport that could do like team-oriented competition. I think that it'd be super cool to one day have like Nike host a team and Asics and Adidas and Reebok, and they all stack their lineups with the best athletes they get, and they could do a draft, they could do recruiting for post-collegiate athletes, kind of like how they do now, but they sign them to these contracts, and then you go and it's like you have a team competition. I think that would be so sweet, and I think that's where this could evolve. I think we're at a good starting point now just by having a set roster, because I think that people aren't going to acknowledge the accomplishment of, I think right now we're at about 30 to 40-ish athletes that he's signed, and the high profile he's gotten to sign on already, especially with the signing of Gabby Thomas. That was huge, and I think that is something that people need to give more credit to, just the Grand Slam Track League, is that I think this is the first step towards seeing something potential like that. I think it'd be so cool to get fantasy track, like just like fantasy football. I started this podcast late because I was watching the Bills and the Rams game, because I had Josh Allen, and he probably just sent me into my fantasy playoffs. But I was also thinking as I'm watching this, I was like, fantasy football and how this is looking right now could apply to Grand Slam track. You could go in with 6 of your friends, and you've got your 6 events, and you could draft based on the slots in each event group, and you could have almost a fantasy track league. And I think Grand Slam track is like the first thing I feel confident could do that, because the Diamond League is awesome and great and all, but I don't think you could do that because there's a little more variability on who shows up to what meets. Granted, I don't know as much about the Diamond League, but I think that's just what I read. But I will get into some of my cons. And I admittedly do have a few cons about Grand Slam track and the future that it's bringing in its long-term success. I do think they have enough money to be sustainable for at least probably 2 seasons. Everything about Grand Slam track hinges on, do they get a TV deal? Do they get a place where they can show these meets that's not just like Flow Track or a website where you have to go and buy a pass to get some crappy web streaming? Like, I think this thing needs an NBC, an ABC, a CBS if it wants to ever be relevant. Maybe not the first year, I'll give it that, but it is going to have to find a home on TV where it is accessible to millions if this is going to be something that catches on, especially with only 4 meets. I think that there is a little bit of, not a problem, but it's kind of a hindrance, I guess. That's a better way to put it. Like, I think that that's something that could hold this back a little bit. And I think part of the selling point is track is an accessible sport. Anybody can do track and field. And you walk through these high schools and you see the kids that are competing on track teams. I mean, some of them are super unathletic, but anybody can do it. And the 100-meter runner who's doing their best as a guy to go out and sprint a 15-second 100-meter, that is somebody who could be super into the idea of Grand Slam track and become a huge fan. Something I don't love next is the whole rivalry concept I keep seeing every time I go and I look at a different Grand Slam track post or a Grand Slam track, like when I look at their website. I think that they know what they're going for. They want us to know the athletes. They want us to be able to emotionally and personally invest in the athletes. And you look at the 1,500 meter dash this year, and so much of the hype going into that race was Kerr versus Ingebrigtsen. And they had been going back and forth over the past couple of years about who was better. And they had raced each other, and they had become this huge rivalry. But everyone was looking forward to what happened at the Olympics because that was the big stage. That was the Super Bowl. That was when they were going head-to-head in their events, and we wanted to know who would win. And the excitement booms as then Americans are super excited about Cole Hocker getting in on the mix. And this whole rivalry concept was something that built that race up and made it as successful as it was. I don't know if I like how they're pushing rivalries and maybe just not letting them naturally just develop over the course of the competition. Like, just the idea that it was brought up and that there was a whole thing that they did about trash talking, I think it was with Cole Hocker. And that's cool and all, but I think that will organically happen. I think it's a little odd that they're pushing it as much as at least I've seen so far. I think that there will be rivalries with this. When you race somebody 4 times, especially when there's close races that start to develop, like that 400-meter group is going to get competitive. I think it's going to just naturally happen. And in these broadcasts that I hope they can do on TV, they should have time to develop this through storytelling and through just the media presentations rather than saying, oh, are these guys your rivals? Like, we will be able to tell. Another questionable decision, and I guess this isn't super deep, but like Grand Slam is a baseball term, so I'm not sure. I understand what Johnson was saying about how he wants it to have like that feel of like track and golf, like they're Grand Slams, but it just is a little weird that like the Diamond League is such a sweet name for track and field. Like that sounds so cool, like the Diamond League. I don't know if I think Grand Slam track kind of rolls off the tongue in that same way, and like a lot of people hear Grand Slam track and they're like, is it Grand Slam a baseball thing? So that's a little weird. The multiple flat like sprint races, the 100 and 200, I think that's a little odd, and we can talk about that more later. But I did see somebody said, I think it was a Let's Run podcast, and they were talking about how you could have 3 different stud sprinters right now go show up and race all of these different like similar events and be winners, even though one is in the long hurdles group and one is in the like long sprints group, and they're not racing each other, but they could still win that event. They could still win like the 200. I think it is. That's the one that overlaps, is the 200 in the long sprints and the long hurdles. Like, it's just a little weird. It may not feel as weird once we get into the actual track and field, but the biggest question about Grand Slam track is just Noah Lyles and Sha'Carri Richardson. Those are the name grabs. A lot of people who don't know anything about track know who Noah Lyles is. Everyone wants to get on him about everything he said about the men's basketball team this year and world champions of what, and I kind of thought that was awesome because he grabbed the attention and put it on himself. He bet on himself in such a big way, and then it paid off, and he won gold, and now he has the brand. Like, Lyles means something, and he's been kind of watching this Grand Slam track thing. I think he's watching it closer than a lot of people give him credit for, especially after Gabby Thomas signed. They were really missing some sprinter firepower. They had Cindy McLaughlin, but now that Gabby Thomas signed, I think that there's a ball that's going to start rolling a little bit on the sprint side, and that is where a number of the unsigned spots are. And so I do think I agree with what Noah Lyles says. Like, if this thing's not on accessible television, it's not worth his time. Like, I think that's got to be, if you are Michael Johnson, I hope he has this already figured out. And if he has it figured out, awesome. You don't even need to worry about this. But, like, you've got to get that TV deal, because without the TV deal, you're not going to get Lyles. Richardson has not been talked about as much. I think that she is a big deal. Like, in my track team that I have, I once asked some of my girl athletes, I was like, oh, did you watch the Olympics? And one of the girls was like, yeah, I watched Sha'Carri Richardson. And I was like, well, it's cool that you know who Sha'Carri Richardson is. Like, people know who she is. And I think just on the sprint side, being able to add even just one of those two would elevate Grand Slam's track's potential and the audience it'll bring in to a whole new level. I would have loved to see Jakob Ingebrigtsen. I get it a little bit that he's not here, though. And if you think about it, I mean, he didn't win a medal in the Olympics in the 1500 or the 800. He did win gold in the 5K, which would have been awesome to see him out there. But also, like, the rivalry is between him and Kerr. And it would have been really sweet to see them duke it out 4 times a year. And so that is kind of a missed opportunity. However, I will say, like, I don't think people are going to lose sweat over distance events. I think the sprints is where a lot of the money is going to get made in this. As much as I would have loved to see Hacker, Kerr, Jakobritsen, and Nagus squaring off 4 times a year, I think that the group that they have put together and the 800-meter, I don't remember his name right now, but the 800-meter runner in that group is going to make it a really competitive and really interesting race. It's going to force the 1,500-meter specialists to really focus down. But that's kind of my initial thoughts about Grand Slam track, and I'm excited to get into things a little more. I'm not sure really where I'm going to go from here, but I'm excited to see over the next week what new news breaks and what the league ends up doing. I know they just launched their ticket sales, and they just made the schedule of the events, and so that might be something I talk about a little more specifically next week. But thank you very much for listening. If you've stuck along this long, I plan on having intro to outro music next time, but since it was just the first episode, I wanted to just kind of talk and just let you get to know me a little bit. And so I am Justin Ayres. This has been the Bell Lap podcast, where we talk about all things Grand Slam track. I look forward to talking with you next week. Until then, I hope you guys have a great one.